Well, thank you, everyone, for joining today's field briefing and policy webinar on homeless policy and the recovery plans. I'm Jerry Jones with the National Alliance to End Homelessness. And the topic for today is sort of both what's in this package, or really three packages of $6 trillion that President Biden has proposed in his first 100 days, and what that would mean to providers and system leaders and other advocates in the field. I am joined by a stellar group of experts: Marion Sanders, the Deputy Director of HOPICS in Los Angeles, one of the leading providers in South LA, and Oliva, the visiting Senior Fellow at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, and then Steve Berg, Vice President for Policy and Programs at the National Alliance. So thank you, panelists, for giving us this information. Marion, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Jerry. My name is Marion Sanders, and I'm Deputy Director at the Homeless Outreach Program Integrated Care System, which is a division of a much larger nonprofit called Special Service for Groups. We're a multi-service agency that has been in the community for more than 30 years. We're 300 strong, 300 employees. We serve nearly 15,000 households annually, all low income, overwhelmingly minority, and predominantly those experiencing homelessness or on the brink of homelessness. If I can sum up the breadth of our work, it would be within three main categories: behavioral health, reentry, and homeless and housing services. The largest part of the work that we do is in homeless and housing services. We are the lead agency in South Los Angeles for homeless services. A key part of our role is to understand the full scope of the homeless landscape, including internal and external factors that impact the work our community does minute by minute.
Marion, can I stop you for 1 second? Your audio went away. It sounds very low. If you have a mic setting that you can turn up, maybe. There we go.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, I'll start back. I'm not sure where we left off, but I'll just dig in here. The largest part of the work that we do at HOPICS is homeless and housing services. We're the lead agency in South Los Angeles for homeless services. And a key part of the role that we play in our community is understanding the full scope of the homeless landscape, including internal and external factors that impact the work that our community does minute by minute to end homelessness. As we cut the ribbon on our 15th temporary housing site that we've stood up in the past 2 years, we understand even more so that the business of ending homelessness does not end because it's 5 p.m. It's 24/7. May marks the 10th year, my 10th year with HOPICS, and consistent commitment towards ending homelessness. And like many of you that are participating in this webinar, I'm fortunate to be in great company with local leaders like my division director, Veronica Lewis, and other community champions who are more tenured in this work, and that will echo my sentiments that there's never been such a groundswell and investment in homeless services like the present time. We are in unprecedented times and that we may never see again. So I'm asking all of my colleagues in this work, direct service providers, to key in on what is happening around homelessness at the federal level like you've never done before. The decisions made relative to the American Jobs Plan and other investments related to strengthening our continuums, like increasing McKinney-Vento Act funding, are vital to our ability to end homelessness in the future. It's time to start digging in and pushing federal policymakers to answer the question that we already know. Can we end homelessness on current federal investments? The answer we all know is absolutely not. The American Jobs Plan and similar policy uplifts the critical need that many direct service providers have seen as a barrier to ending homelessness for years. We need a dramatic increase in Section 8. We need more permanent supportive housing. We need to modernize public housing projects. We need to increase home-based caregiving, and we need to increase investments in our continuum. Los Angeles has housed over 22,000 households in 2020. That's a huge number. However, consistently, it gets overshadowed by the growing number of people in our communities experiencing homelessness. And based on our 2020 count, 66,000 people are currently experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles, and 75% of those are unsheltered. The major contributor to our growth in the number of people experiencing homelessness is the inflow. This tells us a number of things, mainly that affordability is a huge issue. In 2019, we saw 83,000 people fall into homelessness. Dramatic expansion of Section 8, and frankly, universal Section 8 is the solution to this problem. Millions of low-wage workers, seniors, and people with disabilities make up the population of people on the brink of homelessness. I am sure that you all have seen time and time again in your work and your personal life where individuals just needed a long-term subsidy to ensure that they maintain their housing. A personal example that comes from me, my mother. She's 64 years old. She's disabled. She's in recovery. She's formerly homeless, and she receives Social Security benefits. She lives in Las Vegas in a studio apartment, and she pays $799 a month for her rent with utilities included. After she pays her rent, she's left with $5 and food stamps. In the month of April, she was a victim of identity theft, which left her with the inability to pay her rent for the month of May. Two things saved her from being evicted. One, the moratorium on evictions, and two, her nosy daughter. That would be me. I'm sure you all have similar examples like this in your own families and immediate circles, and let alone in the work that you guys do every single day. Many of the people that we serve don't have nosy sons or daughters like me or you, or even a relative to lean on for support, and will soon not have the covering of the moratorium on evictions. In Los Angeles, nearly 25% of our population is over 55. HOPICS just master leased a house to permanently house 10 older adults because we recognize they not only have different needs, but need supportive services to retain their housing. We are currently in the process of retrofitting this unit with a chairlift and other ADA accessories to ensure that we're able to improve the quality of life for these seniors. The seniors that we've identified to live in this house permanently do not have a support network or family or caregivers to help with their health needs. There are more than 2,000 older adults currently actively participating in South LA or South Central's homeless services programs, and 25% of them are enrolled in a program with HOPICS. We know there needs to be more done to help with the older adult population because our homeless population is aging and continues to grow, emphasizing the need for more permanent supportive housing. As an agency, we continue to come up with innovative strategies like using the recovery housing funding to pilot a program that moves people from encampments into housing with supportive services. In the first 2 months of this project, we were able to house over 100 individuals. And we've come across some severe health issues that underscore the need for home-based healthcare that our case managers do not have the capacity nor expertise to provide. We have a 71-year-old male, formerly homeless and incarcerated. He has throat cancer and he can't talk. He has a medical device in his throat that needs to be drained. Temporarily, our nurse case managers are filling in the gap until we're able to provide and connect him to a resource that will be able to provide that home-based support that he needs for long-term care. There's so many other examples just like this. Public housing has been a real solution for low-income households since the 30s, but the folks in public housing have been forgotten and pushed aside. We know about public housing's storied history, but one of the most basic fundamental things that we can do to ensure that they are properly maintained and habitable is provide funding. We can't continue to defer the maintenance on public housing units. There is a failure of the federal government to provide sufficient funding of public housing for some time, causing what they call deferred maintenance. Los Angeles has 16 public housing projects, and many of its residents are aging in place, requiring, like many of our current homeless participants, they're requiring ADA accommodations to assist with mobility issues and quality of life. Modern amenities are nowhere to be found. This, coupled with the failure to provide ongoing maintenance, makes public housing, the housing of last resort. Currently, the Jordan Downs, one of the 16 housing projects in Los Angeles, is going through a complete overhaul. Notably, there are 700 units in this project. And since 2008, this overhaul has been going on. And they're still in phase one, only having completed 250 units in 13 years. The RAD program has been essential to helping to renovate the Jordan Downs project and many others throughout the nation, but more investments are needed to improve these housing projects and attract private investors for ongoing sustainability. As we call for a more robust and sustainable and, quite frankly, universal housing solutions from the federal government, I cannot forget the need to continue to improve our continuums of care through increased investments in McKinney-Vento Act funding, to improve low-performing projects, expand cross-sector collaboration, and to help to fully integrate domestic violence work into the work of homeless services. Direct service providers, I'm calling on you all to put on your advocacy hats and lean in here like never before. And now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Oliva.
Hi, everybody. And Marion, thank you so much for that description. I will also note that I am also a nosy daughter who has done that kind of intervention with my mom too. So it's an important resource that not everybody has, for sure. So thank you, everybody, for having me today. Thanks to the Alliance in particular for having me. I'm going to share my screen, and while I'm doing that, I'll note that Marion talked about a number of resources, and today I'm going to focus on one resource in particular, and you'll see why I'm doing that in just a moment. I'm going to focus on housing choice vouchers and expansion of the housing choice voucher program. There we go. So hopefully a lot of you who are out in the audience know me and have seen me speak before. And you know, I have been doing this work a long time, a little bit over 25 years, right alongside Steve Berg and others who are on the panel today. And what I'm going to look right into the camera and say this as clearly as I can. This is the first time, certainly in my career, that we have a president who's talking about universal housing vouchers and housing as a human right. And we have a Congress that is making investments in housing at a really large scale. So I want to be as clear as possible. We have an opportunity right now to change the lives of the people that we serve, to strengthen the communities that those folks reside in, to strengthen families and improve outcomes for children, and to pursue racial justice and equity, to start to correct the harms that have been done by historical racist practices and disinvestments. And what I'm asking you to do today, as you look at my slide presentation and listen to Steve, is to imagine a world, the world that we work in, where when a household comes to us, presents to an organization or to coordinated entry in a housing crisis, that there is a guaranteed housing choice voucher available to that household, whether it be a family with children or a single individual, person living with disabilities, somebody who's elderly. Imagine how different our system could be when we are really working to connect a household in crisis to a guaranteed housing choice voucher. Inflow would be significantly different. I think Marion said it exactly right. We have homeless services systems that are serving more families and individuals and housing more families and individuals per year than ever before, but we can't actually keep up with the inflow into the system. So expanded housing choice vouchers will impact our inflow and decrease that inflow so we can divert people from homelessness. And our systems will actually be crisis response systems that can operate better. These changes, no matter what happens, won't be immediate, but it will be the strongest step that we can take as a field towards housing justice. So I'm asking everybody who's on the call today to talk to your colleagues and talk to your partners in this work, to do everything that we can to increase housing choice vouchers in this way. And I'm gonna lay this out for you, because even though folks don't always think it, this is exactly in our wheelhouse as homeless service providers. So let's start with making the case about why we need an expansion in the housing choice voucher program. You've all seen these numbers. Homelessness is increasing. Unsheltered and chronic homelessness are going up at alarming rates, and they were going up even before the pandemic. And at the same time, we know that discretionary spending on housing assistance has dropped to historic lows. And why are we not just talking about increasing funding to the McKinney programs that Marion mentioned? It's because the research tells us that housing choice vouchers have a strong positive impact in a variety of different ways. They'll reduce poverty, they will reduce homelessness and overcrowding, they'll reduce domestic violence, improve health and educational outcomes, and advance racial equity. So it needs to be a both and. And as we mentioned before, people should not have to become homeless to get housing. Our systems are rehousing more people than ever and can't keep up with inflow. So vouchers will address both inflows into homelessness and exits from homelessness. Studies tell us that housing choice vouchers can help us reduce homelessness and housing instability. There are a number of resources and evaluations that tell us exactly that. Nearly 16 million households need rental assistance in this country, but don't get it. That means that there are, at any given time, 16 million households that are potentially flowing into housing instability or homelessness. And inside those households, there are a variety of different needs. 32% of those folks are children. 34% are working adults. 12% are seniors, 17% have a disability. And we have the ability to address those needs. Further, we can reach communities of color and begin sort of our efforts and our work towards achieving housing and racial justice. Housing choice vouchers also provide a way to address racial disparities and invest in communities and people who have been subject, again, to historical racist policies and disinvestment. So I'm going to pause here and sort of let folks take in that very brief set of data and argument for housing choice vouchers. I think the case is pretty compelling. So now that we know that the case is incredibly compelling, we know that we need to make that case and reach people who are deciding about priorities for the next package moving through Congress as we speak. But let's start with what we have already. We know that in March 2020, the CARES Act was passed, and it included a number of resources that can be used to serve the populations that we're talking about, specifically people who are experiencing homelessness and housing instability. And most importantly, in that first bullet, the $4 billion for homelessness assistance through the ESG CV program. We also have nearly $50 billion, and that's billion with a B, $50 billion in emergency rental assistance that was passed in two tranches. First, through the December 2020 budget, the omnibus, and again, a second tranche through the American Rescue Plan in March of this year. But most importantly, the American Rescue Plan includes two specific pots of money for people who are experiencing homelessness. The first is $5 billion for about 70,000 housing choice vouchers for people who are experiencing homelessness and housing instability. If you hadn't seen that already, those allocations were announced yesterday on HUD's website. The problem with those vouchers, it's a great resource and it's the right investment to be making right now, is that they're not permanent vouchers. The vouchers can be reused between now and 2023, but after that can only be used by the family or household that holds them at that time. So they're permanent for the household, but they are not permanently added to the housing choice voucher account. So we have to be able to make up the difference. We also have $5 billion for homelessness assistance through the HOME program. Those allocations have also been announced by HUD. And again, these investments are right, and they're going to make a big difference in the work that we're doing right now, but they are actually not enough. So we need to take a look at the entire package and see what's missing. The Biden administration has released two plans, the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan. And these plans are heavy on what we would call the supply side. In other words, they are heavier on the funding for development or production of new units, which is incredibly important. And it was a key part of getting these plans. It was a key part of these plans and of these plans being successful. But we need both supply and affordability. So we need strategies in both areas, and here's why. Production or building units only addresses part of the issue. Development subsidies often do not actually have funding in them that that cover the operating expenses for a landlord. For example, they can build the unit, but then a landlord without a subsidy attached to a unit actually has to set the rent at a rate where they can cover their own operating expenses. And for people who are experiencing homelessness and deep housing instability, those rents without a subsidy attached to them are usually out of their reach. So while we would be building supply, the affordability gap actually hasn't been addressed. So we need both a supply strategy and an affordability strategy. So to solve for the omission of an expansion in the Housing Choice Voucher programs, we really need to make the case for a multi-year mandatory expansion of the Housing Choice Voucher program in the next package. And right now it is up to Congress to add that component as they define what that next package looks like. We know that a permanent voucher is an evidence-based way of addressing homelessness, and we know that because of the family option study that clearly found that housing choice vouchers have a number of positive impacts on families and children. We also know through experience with the HUD-VASH program and other programs like it that pair housing choice vouchers with supportive services to create permanent supportive housing. And remember that housing choice vouchers, like in HUD-VASH, can be permanent supportive housing when they're paired with supportive services. The evidence also tells us that housing choice voucher expansion will positively impact communities of color and households of color, particularly Black and Latino families. So to recap, we need both supply side investments and investments that address housing affordability. And in order to do that, Congress has to add mandatory multi-year funding to the economic recovery package that they are considering right now to make housing choice vouchers available to as many households as possible. Because safe, stable, and affordable housing is so important, not just for the housing investments themselves, but these types of housing investments actually make the other types of investments that are available through the American Rescue Plan more effective. Think about the investments that are being made in education for children. For families who are moving around a lot or living in their car or living in a shelter, they can't actually really take the best advantage of those resources that are already in place without a safe, stable, and affordable place to live. The same thing goes for healthcare. We're making investments through the ARP in healthcare resources, but for people who are living in unsheltered locations, those healthcare resources really can't be maximized. So not only will it impact the families and households that are experiencing homelessness, and communities of color in the most positive way, it actually will make other investments more effective over time. So how do we get what we think is necessary? And I think you all know what I think is necessary at this point. We have to really influence our decision makers and make that strong case to them. And Steve is going to talk about this in a little bit more detail, but I just want to note a couple of things. We can all make a difference in how this plays out by setting up meetings with our congressional delegations, by telling compelling stories the way that Marion did, but using the media to do that, and setting up social media efforts and initiatives to get the word out that we really need folks to pay attention to affordable housing in this next package. You could do a sign-on letter, or you could do a memo to your state delegation. The folks at Ohio, for example, are just in the process of doing a sign-on letter to ensure that these investments are in the next package, and they're sending that sign-on letter to their congressional delegation in Ohio. And then the last thing that I would say here is that we really need to make sure that state congressional delegations from all over the country are telling our leadership within the House and the Senate, and I have the four leaders, the big four leaders listed on this slide. They need to hear from their own caucus that housing is a priority. They are getting inundated with folks who are telling them about different kinds of priorities that should be included. We need to make sure that the voice of people who are experiencing homelessness and housing instability is included in that message, and that they hear loud and clear that housing should be included in the next, that an expansion of housing choice vouchers in particular should be included in the next package. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve Berg, who's going to go through some more of the details. Steve?
All right, thank you, Ann, and thanks to everybody who's on the call today. We rely very heavily on people all over the country to let decision makers at the federal level know what's going on in your community and why this is important to your community. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time just giving a sort of a systemic overview of what the Alliance's policy agenda is this year and how you can help, and then we'll get to questions and answers. So the way, after explaining this to various staffers for members of Congress over and over again, I've come to think there's a way of talking about it, which is this. And if we're really going to end homelessness in our communities, which is something almost everybody would like to see happen, almost any member of Congress would say, yes, I agree. If we could not have people homeless in our community, it would be a better thing. So in order to do that, you need to have two things. You need to have a homeless services system that will, if somebody loses their housing and becomes homeless, people will be there who will find the person, engage with them, keep them safe, and then help them quickly get back into housing. A range of different models depending on what the person's needs are, whether it's diversion or rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, whatever. But the other thing you need, as Ann said, and Marion said, is that we need housing so that people aren't becoming homeless all the time. And so when we go to say we're going to quickly move someone back into housing, there's a way to do that. And so both for the homeless services system and for housing, we need things from the federal government. One of the things we need is funding. And a lot of this conversation today is about funding, and that's because that's the main thing that's needed at this point. The programs that exist at the federal level are good programs. They're set up to really work. But like the HUD programs, whether for homelessness or for housing more generally, are just not funded to actually do the job they're supposed to do. Unlike other parts of the federal anti-poverty infrastructure, the HUD programs aren't entitlement programs. They're funded programs that you know, the Section 8, I remember when I first learned about Section 8 was when I was in law school, longer ago than I'd care to think. And the thing we learned about it was that this is a program that really works. People line up for it. They get on waiting lists. The people who are served by the program really like it for the most part, but it's only funded so that about a quarter of the people who are eligible get help. And now, decades later, the fact remains it's funded so that only about a quarter of the people get help. Unlike, say, in the healthcare world, the Medicaid program is a federal program for healthcare for low-income people. Everyone who's eligible gets the services of Medicaid. In the SNAP program, which is the federal program that provides food benefits, used to be known as food stamps, everyone who's eligible gets the help. With the HUD programs, most of the people who are eligible get on a waiting list, and we need to change that. And that, for homeless services, the main funding program, the largest funding program is the HUD homeless assistance and the emergency grants program. The VA, of course, has homeless programs for veterans. There are other homeless programs like healthcare for the homeless, education for homeless children and youth spread among different agencies. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration has homeless programs. The largest one is HUD. Another important services is, of course, having the services, not just the housing, but the services that go with it so that people can get into housing and then stabilize there and stay there and get the help they need to make that permanent. So that's homeless services. And then the housing piece, I think the most important thing, and I would just reiterate what Ann said, that President Biden's statement in his campaign platform that we need to make the Housing Choice Voucher Program a universal program where everyone who's eligible gets help would be the most important thing for low-income people probably since the enactment of the Medicaid program in the 1960s. It would be the most important thing in the last 60 years and would make a huge difference in how many people were homeless, how long people stayed homeless, or whether anybody even stayed homeless. So the voucher piece is very important. Development is important. I mean, if vouchers were to become something that everyone who is eligible got help with, it would require changes. It would require there to be more housing that people with vouchers could afford. People know in communities where rents are going up, it's sometimes hard to use a voucher. That requires housing. There needs to be emergency assistance so that if people lose a job or have medical emergencies, they have some way to deal with that and still be able to pay their rent. So both homeless services and housing are key parts of this. And we need to, the policy agenda is about building those things up. Right now, what's on the table in terms of getting more funding for those processes is two kinds of bills. There's recovery emergency legislation. Ann talked about that. There's already been the CARES Act. There's been emergency legislation passed in December. There's the president has put out the American Jobs Act, which is an infrastructure bill that would be emergency legislation to make, and part of that would be to make more housing available, to build more housing, to provide rental subsidies. Another important piece of the emergency legislation that was in the proposal that the president has, we haven't seen what Congress is going to do that, is important funding for services as well. There's something called home and community-based services, which is basically using Medicaid to fund a range of different services that people in housing need to stabilize their housing. The home and community service proposals that are being talked about in Congress now would make it so that the federal government would fund 100% of those services if they were provided through a state's Medicaid program. Whereas usually with Medicaid now, as people might know, the federal government pays part of it and the state pays part of it. So that's another important piece. It was, the president talked about it in his job plan. The details are still a little unclear. People in Congress are working to develop those bills right now. So that's the recovery legislation. And then there's also the sort of regular annual funding. And those of you who have been involved with the Alliance for a long time know every year we talk about the the regular spending bill for that provides funding for the continuum of care and provides funding for existing voucher programs. That's happening too. The president has sent out his initial proposal, not a lot of details yet. That's more details we think are coming the end of this month in terms of what the president is asking Congress to provide for the regular funding bill. But one thing he did spell out is he wants a $500 million increase for the HUD homeless programs, which would be the largest increase in those programs basically ever since the programs were first ramped up back in the late 1980s. And so we're going to try to work with the committees that have jurisdiction over that to make sure that that money is in there. There's also the regular annual funding. The president's proposal also says that they want to add 200,000 more housing choice vouchers to the program. That would also be good. we've got a lot of work to do to convince people in Congress to put that money on the table. So let me talk just a moment about Congress before we get on to questions. And I think Ann has another slide to put up here. As you know, right now, we've got a Congress that has already gone along with a great deal of emergency spending, including for homelessness programs and for housing programs. They are under a lot of pressure from a lot of different interest groups to spend money on a lot of different things. So there is no guarantee at all that these things that President Biden has asked for, or things that President Biden hasn't asked for that we think are necessary, there's no guarantee at all that those will be in Congress, because Congress has to set priorities and there's a lot of competition. On the other hand, it's very possible, I feel like it's very possible, maybe more possible than ever before, to get substantial increases in funding for these activities from Congress this year and next year. But I think this year is really a special time. We really need everybody to think about who their members of Congress are, who will support this. The homeless programs are fortunate that they've received bipartisan support over the years. So don't just think about Democrats, but the Democrats are in the majority in the House and the Senate. And for them, this question of priorities is really important. Every member of Congress has a say in what the priorities are. The list that Ann has put up here is people who have a particular influence at this point in time at this Congress. So we want everybody to think about how they can get their members on board with this agenda. If people are from the states that are listed here, we want you to think even harder about that. And please be in touch with us after the webinar. I think Jerry Jones, who's kicked the webinar off, he's our point person on field activity around advocacy, and would love to hear from people in these states and other places who feel like they want to do some more work to get their members of Congress on board with that. So let me just leave it at that, just with again, to reiterate the other pleas from the other speakers. Please get involved. Please work with your members of Congress to make sure these possibilities are really in play. People who are homeless need our help for this. They need our help. We'll give them our help every day. This is something a little special, a little different, but something that can make this year, there's opportunities to make a change like never before. And it's not going to happen by itself. But we don't need it to happen by itself, because we're all here to help make it happen. So let me stop there and turn it back over to Jerry Jones, and he'll start getting some of the questions and answers going that Ann and Marion and I can try to answer.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you to all three of you for those presentations. As Steve said, we have some time for questions and answers. So there's a Q&A box that many of you have already been using. Please direct your questions there, and I'll read them off to our panelists. And some of you have also put questions in the chat, but I'll from here forward be reading the Q&A box. So that's the other button you should have access to. There was one question that appeared a number of times in the session that I can answer this one quickly, which is, will the slides be available? Is there a video for this webinar? And the answer is yes. We will have it up in several days on our website at endhomelessness.org. If you go to events and then videos, you'll find this after today, and that will be a good resource for you. If you join late as well, you can watch the whole thing there. Let me read a question from this is for Ann. A question about housing vouchers, and can you say more about how the availability of vouchers will make other investments in the American Families Plan go further or be more effective? You had mentioned that, I think.
Yeah, I did mention that. Thank you for the question. The point that I was trying to make in my presentation is that housing really should be considered sort of the baseline for other types of, and Marion, please jump in here. I see you shaking your head, or nodding your head actually. This should really be the baseline to amplify the other types of efforts and investments that are being made. And the two examples that I used were first healthcare. We know that housing is a social determinant of health, right? And that without safe, stable, and affordable housing, these investments in healthcare will be great for people who are in safe, stable, and affordable housing, but really won't reach or have the desired impact for people who are experiencing homelessness, especially unsheltered homelessness. And the same goes for other types of investments like the child tax credit, for example. The child tax credit can lift some families out of poverty, but many, many more families will be lifted out of poverty if they have access to the child tax credit, plus a safe, stable, and affordable place to live provided through Housing Choice Voucher. And then, you know, the other most obvious example is about educational outcomes for children who move around a lot because they are in unstable housing situations or who are living in shelters or in unsheltered locations won't really reap the benefits of these investments in education for children that have been part of the American Rescue Plan or that are proposed as we move forward. So housing really should be considered the base, and other investments really can add to that base. Marion, you want to?
No, I think you summed it up really well. I was just going to point out that we know through the housing first model that when you put folks into housing, you see a decrease in mental health symptoms, you see a decrease in physical health symptoms, and those are just the true signs that housing and supportive services are the thing that folks need to just stabilize and improve their quality of life just overall.
Great. Steve, here's a question. I'll start with you. Kevin would like to know more COC funding is needed and would be great. What are the chances of flexibility in the match requirements for continuum of care funding?
So the match requirements, of course, are a lot. I feel like right now, I mean, the last time we got the program, we tried to loosen the match requirements quite a bit, and we're surprised to find many very strong. You know, we need match requirements, and we need the local community to show that it's got a stake. So I think the McKinney programs are somewhat unique among federal programs. They allow other kinds of federal money to serve as a match. So that's some flexibility we have already. I think it's if people really need to talk to their members of Congress about, because I think that it's not something there's a lot of understanding of by members of Congress. So I would say that's not an issue that's immediately ripe for big progress. But I think if people were able to get their members of Congress to understand more what the impact of it is, it would make a big difference.
Thank you. Anything from other panelists on that? If not, I've got another question. And please, everyone, keep questions coming. We'll get to as many as we can. A question for Marion. You talked about the impact on clients of the lack of federal funding on people coming to providers for help, and that those consequences are staggering. Can you talk about the impact of an overwhelmed and under-resourced homeless system on the public's confidence in actually ending homelessness?
Wow. Thank you for that question. The homeless service system, specifically in LA, we're overwhelmed. And I talked about the inflow into homelessness. We're trying to do so much to serve the people that are currently homeless and stave off the inflow. And what typically happens is that the general public sees that, they believe that we're not doing enough. We're not doing enough. And we know that we're doing every single thing that we can with the resources that we have, and trying to leverage other systems to come in to help assist with ending homelessness within our communities. If we had more resource and more investment, then we could do more. One of the other things that I think is critically important is that folks don't understand what the homeless service system is designed to do and what it's not designed to do. We cannot solve for poverty, right? We serve the people who are impoverished. We cannot resolve the rising rents, right? We can advocate for those things. Our system is not designed to do those things. And so a greater understanding of the homeless service system in general and what it can and can't not do is critically important to helping to understand, helping our system to kind of get out from under those misnomers. An under-resourced system and Los Angeles is definitely that under-resourced. We can't do as much as we need to do for folks experiencing domestic violence. We can't do as much as we need to do for the youth who are falling into homelessness increasingly. We can't do as much as we need to do for seniors. We can't do a lot of the upstream work that we need to do for people on the brink. We're bogged down with the people that are currently in the system. And so it paints a negative light on the work that we are doing. And like I said before, we house 22,000 people in 2020, but we were overshadowed by the 83,000 people who fell into homelessness and that big number of 66,000 people that are currently experiencing homelessness. And we will continue to be overshadowed by that. Once the moratorium on evictions is up, we don't know what that number is going to be. We have estimates about what it's going to be, and that will be what is being talked about. And so, yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Thank you. That's
Something to that,
very
Jerry?
helpful. Yes, Ann.
So I think that those exact reasons are why we as a field need to advocate for universal housing choice vouchers. And let me just keep going with that example that Marion gave, right? Let's say even half of the people who are flowing into homelessness over the course of a year are eligible for a housing choice voucher in a universal housing choice voucher world, right? We're diverting, our system has now changed to really diverting folks back into housing through the use of this particular resource. And then we're able for our system to do the thing that it is designed to do, which is really to assist folks in a housing crisis and get them rehoused. So, and something like, don't quote me on this, but something like 98% of people who are experiencing homelessness meet the income requirements for housing choice vouchers. So you can see how the system would change to be able to address needs at a different scale if we had access to both supply and affordability, which is what we really need to press our policymakers on right now.
I think something else to add to it is the one-time investments and things like that cause a cycle into homelessness. We can keep somebody housed for a certain amount of time, and then if we don't have those longer-term investments, we can bank on the fact that those people are going to fall back into homelessness because the external factors contributing to people experiencing homelessness are there and they're magnifying on an ongoing basis. And so that's something that, you know, folks who really don't understand the homeless service system miss. And so we're battling all of those things at one time, trying to serve this population as a system of care.
Thank you, Marion. I'm going to combine two questions. I want to squeeze in a few more, and participants stay with us, and we'll get to as many as we can. Bree in New Mexico asks, both of these are related to vouchers. So how do we make sure that a major expansion of vouchers doesn't lead to rent inflation as the system becomes flush with temporary cash? And then Lisa in Vermont also sort of related, what's also the strategy for the challenge of people who already have vouchers now who are struggling to be able to use those vouchers, especially in higher resourced communities? And let me pose that to you first.
So I think that those are really both really important operational questions. I'm not sure that we know the answer exactly to the first one. Steve or Marion might be better informed than me on this, but it would have to be part of our implementation plan to ensure that we're actually doing implementation over a number of years, and that we're doing it in a way that doesn't have that effect. So I think if we plan for it and plan to it, we can mitigate that to some extent. But I also think in terms of sort of landlord engagement and how to use vouchers that are already in play, there's two things that folks should be thinking about. Many of you have probably read the news and seen that in the state of Iowa, it is now legal to discriminate against people for the source of income they have, and specifically for housing choice vouchers. So we need to advocate for protections around source of income discrimination. And we also need a robust way to engage with our landlords that's really positive. The team that works on the framework for an equitable COVID-19 homelessness response, that includes the Alliance and the Center and many other experts, are planning to work with some folks in the field who are really good at doing this. And Marion might know the folks at Brilliant Corners who work in LA are going to be partnering with us on some of these, on some resources to help folks really think about maybe how to restructure and centralize housing navigation and landlord engagement.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'd like to add on to that just a little bit. One of the things, the two things that I see, one, there has to be system alignment. Within the homeless service system, we have kind of multiple systems doing this work. We have the homeless service system, we have Department of Mental Health, we have Department of Health Services, we have those systems, and we're all competing for the same units, right? And so it creates an unintended competition. Maybe one agency is able to provide a little bit more rent than another agency, and the property owners get wind of that. And so there's well, I prefer this voucher over that, but I prefer this subsidy over that subsidy. And that's not what we want to see. What needs to happen is regional coordination around landlords and property owners, helping them to understand what our system is doing and where we're going, and get them in alignment with this work so that they can walk alongside of us and see what resources we have and the population, and understand that. We understand that, you know, renting units and all of that is it's a business. However, we want them to stand alongside us as our allies. And I think that that's a large part of the work in making sure that we don't have that type of a competition within our system. So.
There are so many other great questions that I apologize, we're just not going to be able to get to, but I want to give Steve a chance to make some final comments, since the other questions went to Ann and Marion toward the end there. Let me also say, everyone who registered will be receiving a link to the video that will be on the website, and so you'll have our contact information that way to follow up with questions after today. Steve, it looked like you were about to chime in on that last question, or to make a final point.
let me just end by saying thank you to everybody again for being part of this. We believe, as everyone has said, there's a huge opportunity this year to make the kind of progress on national policy that we just haven't made ever, and I mean ever, like being history. We need people to be part of that. Happy we get such a good response to these kinds of webinars, and we'll be in touch about how to get organized to make sure that Congress is hearing these things, because we want to take advantage of the opportunity. We feel like we can do it. So we're looking forward to that, and looking forward to working with everyone in the future.